On Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis again. I don't remember if we did it yesterday, but we're going to start at the Mishnah. We'll do it, and then we'll go from there. So Mishnah Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis tells us as follows: Shnayim shekitshtu shnei nashim. If you had two men that were mekadesh, two women, v'shas knisas on the chuppah hechlifu et shel zeh lezeh v'et shel zeh lezeh. When they actually did the chuppah, so they actually swapped wives. We'll have to see whether that was intentional or not intentional. So when they sleep with the other one, so since there was Kedushin, so they're officially married women. So when they sleep with the other one, now they're going to be Isser Eishes Ish, and be Chai because of Eishes Ish. V'im hayu achin, if Reuven and Shimon, the two that got married, were brothers, so then they're chayav because of Eishes Ach, because each one was with their brother's wife. V'im hayu achayos, and if the two women were sisters, Mishum Isha El Achosa, then each one was also over Isha El Achosa, his wife's sister. V'im hayu nidos, and if they were also nidos at the time, Mishum Nida. So it's possible that each person involved in the thing can be chayav for four things if it was the perfect storm. And now we also are going to be mafresh them for 3 months. And what's so interesting is that it sounds like they're allowed to go back to their husbands for some reason. We'll have to figure out why. Usually when you're mezana like that, if you commit adultery, you're not allowed to go back to your husband, whether he's a Kohen or not. So either way, they're going to have to wait for 3 months before they go back. Why? Because Shema Meubarashem. We want to make sure that if they're pregnant, that we know that they're pregnant from this illicit relation, and therefore we would know that the baby is actually a mamzer. Vim hayu ketanos, but if they were ketanos and they weren't able to have babies, she'enan reuyos leiled, machzirun osan miyad, then they can go back right away, because we don't have to worry about the 3-month waiting, we don't have to worry about them becoming pregnant. Vim hayu kanos, and if these women happen to be kanos, the ones who were mezaneh, who were with the other husband, then they are nifselu min truma, then they can't have truma because there was a ma'aseh znus, and therefore they are disqualified from eating truma. So the Gemara says right away, hechlifu. The Gemara says, are you claiming that they on purpose swapped wives? And the Gemara is going to give 3 reasons why it's not possible to claim that they did it on purpose and that it must have been an accident. What's the first reason that it couldn't have been on purpose? Midei birishiyei askinan. Generally, the Mishnah, it says, does not illustrate cases or scenarios which involve Rishayim who would deliberately go ahead and transgress the Isser of Arayos. Visu, and the second possibility, second reason it can't be b'mezid, haditani Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia says, Harei kan sheishes rechatos. Rabbi Chia said that in this case of the perfect storm, so there are actually 16 chatos to go around, because each person involved, each one of the 4, has to bring 4 chatos. I b'mezid mi'ika korban. It can't be that it was done b'mezid, because if it was done b'mezid, then there is no korban. You only bring a korban chatas if it was done b'shogeg. Finally, Amar Rav Yehuda tani huchlavu. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda, for those 2 reasons, and we'll give a third reason in a second. For those 2 reasons, so he says it must have been that it was done bishogeg. Huchlafu, it happened, not hechlifu, that they did it themselves on purpose. Hachinami mistaber makes sense, and this also makes sense, and this is the third reason why we can't say that it was on purpose. Tiktani sefer, because the sefer says, Im hayu ketano she'enan reuyos leiled machzirun samiyad, that if they were ketanos who can't have kids, so then we get them back right away. V'i b'mezid misharin, if it was b'mezid, how can they go back to their husbands? Halo kasha, that's not a kasha. Why? Because when you're dealing with a ketana, pitoy ketana ones ninhu, the seduction of a ketana is considered to be ones, against her will, even if it quote unquote was willingly. She doesn't seem to have, she's not looked at as having the das to be able to know and to be able to make a decision and say no. Ve'ones b'Yisrael mishra shari, and ones b'Yisrael would be okay. And therefore, if she was a ketana, so then even if it was b'mezid, she'd be able to go back. So we still want to prove that it couldn't have been b'mezid. Eladiktani, the last part of the Mishnah, mafrishin osan shlosha chadash and shema meubarosein. We put them aside for 3 months because maybe they're meubaros. Halav meubaros sharian. Now, it doesn't mean if they're not pregnant. It means if we didn't need to know whether they were pregnant or not, so then it sounds like we wouldn't put them aside for 3 months, and we would just let them go ahead and get married right away. But that implies that you can get married right away. If it was b'mezid, so then how can they go ahead and get remarried right away? How can they get remarried anytime? They're usher to their husbands. Rather, we know, and we see from here that we prove for 3 different reasons. A, because we're not going to be dealing with Rishayim. B, because he said that there are 16 chatos. C, because how can they go back to their husbands? For all of those reasons, it's clear that the Mishnah is talking about a case where the 2 women were mekadesh to the 2 men, and then by accident on the night of the chuppah they swapped wives, but it was an accident, and therefore it's a korban chatas. They can go back to their husbands and
not 16.
We're not dealing with midei b'rishayim askinan.
What's been ba'onos Yisrael? It was for a goy.
I'm sorry?
What's been ba'onos Yisrael? If it was a goy, that she would also be permitted back to her husband.
Well, it could be ones b'Yisrael as opposed to a Kohen. It could be as opposed to a Kohen. If a Kohen, if she... B'Yisrael versus a Kohen.
Okay.
Even if it's ba'ones, if a Kohen's wife against her will, so she still can't go back to the kahuna. Okay, so now, hold on tight. Uman haitana de islay iser kolel, the iser mosif, the iser bas achas. Now, the Gemara is going to set up this case. Now, I thought it was very simple. The Gemara is going to set up this case to be a case where there is not only an Isser Kolel, which we said is a regular Isser Chalal Isser, there's not only an Isser Mosif, there's also an Isser Bas Achas. We're going to set up the case that it has all three of those, and they want to know who's the Tana who holds that when you have all three of those, so you're in fact going to be Chayav for each one. Well, who did we say yesterday? It's an interesting question in the Gemara, because who did we say yesterday? We ended yesterday by saying that both we said that Rabbi Yossi would be Mechayev Shtayim across the board. And we said Rabbi Shimon would be Mechayev 1 except by a Bas Achas. So the Gemara could have answered, this is Rabbi Yossi. But it didn't. It sounds like it's asking, besides Rabbi Yossi, is there another Tana who holds that you would be Chayav for all of the things, again, because each one of them is present in our Mishnah. How is each one present in our Mishnah? Unfortunately, the Gemara doesn't tell us. The Gemara just gives the answer. So the question is, how is the Gemara... Or what is the Gemara thinking when the Gemara asks this question? By definition, if the Gemara is asking the question, who's the Tana? The Gemara is clearly learning that the case in our Mishnah is a case which includes all three of these things. Again, Isser Mosif for our purposes is when you have an Isser object, and then it becomes Usser to more things. That's an Isser Mosif, and it's going to be the Isser on the original thing as well. An Isser Kolel, we said, is just any other Isser, whether we say Isser Chalal Isser or not, and Bas Achas is when two Isserim come together. So what is this case that the Gemara is suggesting? So Rashi tells us, and we'll say it outside, Rashi is explaining as follows. The case is that Reuven and Shimon are brothers. Again, we're trying to figure out a case where you have the 16 chatos, 4 for each. So he says Reuven and Shimon are brothers. Rachel and Leah are sisters. Who gets married first? Reuven does Kedushin with Rachel. What happens when Reuven does Kedushin with Rachel? So Rachel, she's the Asr object. She becomes Asr to Shimon how? 2 ways. Eishes Ish and Eishes Ach. What's that? Which one of those three? Is that an Isser Mosif, Isser Kolel, or Isser Bas Achas? It's an Isser Bas Achas. Yeah. You have two things happening at the same exact time. Eishes Ish and Eishes Ach. So check that off. Again, we're trying to create a case where we have all three of them, and we see that you're Chayav for all three, whether it's an Isser Mosif, Isser Kolel, Isser Bas Achas. So we've checked off, we've made our case an Isser Bas Achas case. What happens next? Shimon is Mekadesh Leah, who happens to be Rachel's sister. So what happens now? So now, Rachel is Asr to Shimon how? As Achos Ishto. As his sister, as his wife's sister. What kind of Isser is that? Well, she was Asr to the entire world before. Now she's only Asr to Shimon. So what kind of Isser is that? That's an Isser Kolel. So that's just a regular Isser Chalal Isser when it's not an Isser Mosif. So now we can check off that this case includes an Isser Kolel. So what are we missing? An Isser Mosif. What happens after they're already done? So now Rachel becomes a Nida. When she becomes a Nida, what happens again? Now she's Asr to who? To the entire world, including her husband, once again. And now that Isser Mosif goes on to Shimon as well. So we've...
her husband anyhow, because of the Kedushin.
Okay. Again, I don't know if it matters whether it's not clear. Rashi's not clear that it's saying that it's an Isser Mosif dafka because of the husband. It might just be an Isser Mosif because again, this Isser object now becomes Isser to the entire world once again as a Nida, not just as an Eishes Ish. And now she's going to be Isser to Shimon again. So again, we've been able to construct a case where Reuven marries Rachel, so now you have a Bas Achas because you have two Isurim coming together, Eishes Ish and Eishes Ach. Then you have the scenario where Shimon then goes and is Mekadesh Leah. You have the Isser Kolel of Achos Ishto. And then you have, when Rachel becomes a Nida, you have the Isser Mosif. So we've made our case, we've constructed our case in the Mishnah as being a case that includes all three. We said in the Mishnah that you're going to be chayav 4. Each of them is going to be chayav 4 for a total of 16. And therefore, who is this man de Amar of our Mishnah who holds that for each one of those 3 we say Isser Chal al Isser? So we could have said that it was who? We could have said that it was Rabbi Yossi based on what we said yesterday. But the Gemara wants to see if it's somebody else also besides for Rabbi Yossi.
When she comes out of Isser Kazanita, she still had on it Ish
in a Chanami.
On it.
Right.
So
the Gemara is learning that, again, once it's Isser object, it's a question of whether she's becoming Asr to just one other person, that would be an Isser Kolel, or if she's becoming object to an entire world, then it's included in that person, and that's an Isser Mosif. Yeah, interesting. So now we're going to say, who is this? Amar V'Yuda Amarav Rabbi Meir he, but that's not easy either, because now we got to understand Rabbi Meir's case. So this is Rabbi Meir, and as we'll see in a second, there's a brisa which shows that Rabbi Meir holds that you're chayav Isser Chal al Isser by Isser Mosif, Isser Kolel, and Isser Bas Achas. And we thought that constructing this case was difficult. Wait till the next case. So the Gemara says, Yesh Ochel Ditani, Yesh Ochel Achila Achas V'chayav Aleha Arba Chatos V'Asham Echad. There's a case where you can eat one kizayis of one piece of meat, and you'll be obligated for 4 korban chatos and 1 korban asham. What's the case? A tamei person who ate chaylev, which is the fat, v'hu nosar, which happens to be nosar, min mukdashin, happens to be hekdesh, b'yom HaKippurim. He eat it on Yom HaKippurim. Okay. He's trying to gain the Guinness Book of World Records to be the worst Jew in the world. Right. Rabbi Meir Omer, Rabbi Meir says, Im Haisa Shabbos, that if it was Shabbos, Vehotzio Bifiv, and he doesn't swallow it right away, and he walks from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim on Shabbos with the food in his mouth, he's going to be chayav for Hotzah as well. Now, you just noticed, I just want to say as a side point, Rabbi Meir, it's interesting, he says if it was Shabbos, what does that imply? Rabbi Meir actually holds that if you carry on Yom Kippur, you're not necessarily chayav, or else he wouldn't have to bring the case of Shabbos. So it's interesting, he's saying that you're only chayav for Hotzah on Shabbos, not on, we don't pass like this, but it's clear from this Gemara that he says you're only chayav for Hotzah on Shabbos, not on Yom Kippur. Amru lo eino min Hashem. They don't have a problem with the rest of it. They just said, come on, we're not discussing Hotzah, let's just leave Hotzah out of it. But what comes out here? So you think the Gemara is going to explain? Nope, that's it. That's how we see that Rabbi Meir holds Isser Chal al Isser by Isser Kolel, Isser Mosif, and Bas Achas. What's the case? How do you see this case now? How do you possibly construct this case to be a case which includes all of these things? So let's say Rashi outside again. What's the Isser object here? The piece of meat, the piece of chaylev. So you have a piece of chaylev. So let's see what all of these things. Again, we have to find how in this case there's an Isser Mosif, an Isser Kolel, and an Isser Bas Achas. And again, it's only Rabbi Meir, so that piece about carrying it in your mouth is going to be very crucial. Because if it wasn't just, if that piece wasn't crucial, then it would be the Tanakama also. So that piece is going to be one of the 3. So let's see, how do we construct this? So you have a piece of chaylev. A behema is born. We're going to say this outside. There's a piece of chaylev. When the behema is born, before it becomes hekdesh, that piece of chaylev is asur ba'achila. You can go ahead and you can play baseball with it, you can go ahead and you can sell it, you just can't eat it. So that's the original isser that we're starting with. Okay, so you have an isser of chaylev. Now, when that isser chaylev, when that piece of chaylev becomes hekdesh, now that piece of chaylev is not just asur ba'achila to everybody, it's asur b'hana'ah to everyone as well. So that piece of chaylev, which was only asur ba'achila to everyone, is now asur b'hana'ah to everyone as well. What kind of Isser is that? That's an Isser Mosif. There's more Isser being added to that piece. So now we've checked off the Isser Mosif part. What happens when it becomes Nosar now? Nosar is left over after its time. Now it's Asr even to the Mizbeach. What kind of Isser is that? That happens to also be an Isser Mosif. Because again, first it was Asr Be'achila, now it's Asr Bahana, now it's Asr even to the Mizbeach. Okay, so we're running out of time. We've got to find an Isser Kolel and an Isser Bas Achas. So what's the Isser Kolel? When you have a Kohen, a separate Kohen over here, sitting over here, when he becomes Tameh, now he is Asser to eat this Chaylev, which is Hekdesh. He cannot eat Hekdesh. What kind of Isser is that? That's an Isser Kolel. Because now this Kohen is quote-unquote removed from the piece of Isser. He can no longer eat this, even though he could theoretically not have eaten it because it was Chaylev and Nosar, but he can no longer eat it as the Hekdesh part, even though he could usually eat Hekdesh. Now he's going to get a separate Isser for eating Hekdesh because he's Tameh. That's an Isser Kolel. The fact that it's Yom Kippur now, everyone in the world is Asr to eat this piece of meat, but that doesn't preclude the piece of meat from including any more Isurim, so that's also an Isser Kolel. So now you have the Isser Kolal has been checked off. Where do we have the Isser Bas Achas? When Rabbi Meir comes and says, if you're chewing it from Rishus HaRabim to from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim on Shabbos, so you're chayav for carrying, what's that? That's an Isser Bas Achas. How? Because Shabbos and Yom Kippur come together. So in this, I don't want to say crazy chas v'shalom, but in this crazy made-up case, where you had a person who took a piece of chelev, which was hekdesh, which was nosar, and he happened to have been a Tamei Kohen, and he ate it on Yom Kippur, and then he carried it out, before he swallowed it, he carried it out from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim. In this case, you have all of these Yisurim of Isser Kolel, Isser Bas Achas, Isser Mosif, and we see, what does the Brisa say? You're chayer for 4 chatos and 1 asham. What does that mean? We see that Isser Chalal Isser for all of these cases across the board. Just as an aside, what are the 4 chatos that you're asser? So the 4 chatos you get are chatos for eating chelev, chatos for eating nosar, chatos for eating hekdesh while you're tamei, and a chatos for eating on Yom Kippur. And then what's the asham that you get? The asham is for eating hekdesh in general. A regular person who eats hekdesh gets an asham. And then there's actually a 5th chatos, according to Rabbi Meir, for carrying on Shabbos. But again, for our purposes, to simplify it, if I can, for our purposes, the important part is that we see from here that Rabbi Meir holds like Rabbi Yossi, that Isser Chalal Isser, by Isser Mosif, by Isser Kolel, by Isser Bas Achas, and therefore our Mishnah, which we constructed to be a case which has all of these, we're saying is Rabbi Meir. Good? Weiter. Fine. So now, what are we going to say? For Rabbi Meir, Aliba Deman. If I haven't confused you enough, now I want to know, who is Rabbi Meir going like? So yes, our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, who holds that your Isser Chalal Isser, and you're going to be Chayiv Achatas for Bas Achas, Kolel, and Mosim, and that's why in our case, the way that we constructed it with the married woman who were with the 2 brothers, that's why they're all going to be Chayiv for 4 Chatos. Who is this like? What does that mean, who is this like? Well, Rabbi Meir had 2 rabbis, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. So there's a separate case that I'll say outside. There's a case in Gemara Shabbos that you may mention. This is where it's geschmack. When you learn DAF Yomi, if you remember even some of the details, then you know, okay, it's worth it. So there's a case where there were 2 babies. One was born on Shabbos and one was born on Sunday. Anybody remember that case? And now Shabbos comes and it's time to do the bris milah. And what happens? What do? You take the Sunday baby by accident and you do the bris on the Sunday baby. So the question is, ta'a b'dvar mitzvah, if you make a mistake when you were trying to do a mitzvah, and you really didn't do a mitzvah, because you didn't do the mitzvah because you didn't end up giving the bris milah. You gave the bris milah, but it wasn't a bris milah because it was before the 8th day. So ta'a b'dvar mitzvah v'lo asa mitzvah, you didn't end up doing a mitzvah. Are you chayiv or not? So Rabbi Eliezer says, when you're trying to do a mitzvah, l'maisa you messed up, you're chayiv achatas. And Rabbi Yoshua says, no, you get an A for trying. Since you tried to do the mitzvah, even though you made a mistake, you get an A for trying, and you're going to be pater. Yes, you didn't do the bris milah, right? But we're going to do pater, because again, if you did it on Shabbos, and it wasn't really a bris milah, so you did malacha. So according to Eliezer, too bad. I know you had good intentions, but l'maisa you made a mistake, and therefore you're going to be chayiv. And according to Rabbi Yoshua, you had good intentions, and therefore if you made a mistake, you're going to be pater. Let's just say it outside for a second. What's the intention in our case of the married people? What are they trying to do? What mitzvah are they trying to do when they take their wife and sleep with her? Puravu. Or, as somebody maybe suggested, consummate the marriage. So they're trying to do a mitzvah. What happens? Again, we just explained that our mission is accidental. They swapped wives accidentally. So what happened? So, ta bidavar mitzvah, v'lo asa mitzvah. Right? So are they going to be pater or chayiv? Well, what does our Mishnah say? They're chayiv. So who's that like? That's like Rabbi Eliezer, who says ta bidvar mitzvah v'lo asa mitzvah, because they didn't actually consummate the marriage, because again, she was quote unquote already mikadesh to somebody else. So it seems like our Mishnah is going ta bidvar mitzvah v'lo asa mitzvah, seems to be going according to the opinion that holds ta bidvar mitzvah v'lo asa mitzvah, you're going to be chayiv. So let's see that inside. For Rabbi Meir liba deman. What? Well, dafka b'shogeg, you wouldn't be chayiv otherwise. You wouldn't be chayiv achatas if it wasn't b'shogeg. That case over there was when you made a mistake with the baby, b'shogeg. If you take the wrong baby on purpose on Shabbos, then you're not going to be chayiv achatas, then it's mazid. So ta b'dvar mitzvah. What?
Are they still accomplishing?
So we're going to see. We're going to have to get to the discussion that they can't necessarily be. You can't necessarily have a kid from the first active relations. So we're going to have to get to that in a second. The Gemara is always one step ahead of us. It's confusing, but they're always one step ahead of us. So who's he like? So like we said, it can't be like Rabbi Yoshua. Why? He said when you're taking the babies and you make a mistake, so you get an A for trying and you're pater. So then why in our Mishnah, if it was true that that it was him, then our Mishnah would say, you were trying to do puravu, again, it was a mistake, you took the wrong woman by accident, you didn't realize, but at the end of the day you should be patur, because tabid var mitzvah, you thought you were doing a mitzvah and you made a mistake. Ela liba de Rabbi Eliezer, must be a liba de Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that even if you're trying and you get an A for effort, you're still going to be chayav. Perfect. Then the Gemara says, no. Iba Yisema, yes, you could say it's Rabbi Eliezer, but you could also claim that it's Rabbi Yeshua. Iba Yisema le'olam aliba de Rabbi Yeshua. Maybe it's like Rabbi Yeshua too. How can it be like Rabbi Yeshua? I just told you that according to Rabbi Yeshua, tabid var mitzvah v'lo asa mitzvah, you're patur. So why in our Mishnah would you be chayav for chatos? Kika amar Rabbi Yeshua tabid var mitzvah patur hani mili gabe tinokos. No. He only said patur by the tinokos. Why? Dismano bahul. Because you got to do it quickly. You got to do it on the 8th day. You're running out of time. Somebody suggested maybe that it means also that you want to do it as soon as possible. But I think it just means that you have to do it within the 8th day. So what's the problem? Why you patur? So if you got to do it on the 8th day, so we understand why you were rushing. And you were rushing, so we're going to give you the A for effort, we're going to make you patur. You messed up, but it's sort of your fault, but not really your fault. Because again, you were all rushed because you wanted to get the baby, you wanted to give the baby the bris meal, and you didn't have time to go check and make sure that it was the right one, etc. Again, maybe they look alike, and you have to double check with the nurse or something. You couldn't do it. So we're not going to blame you. But lemaisa aval hai kevan de'ein zmano bahulo. They didn't have to do the mitzvah of pruvu now. Yes, they want to. Yes, the Gemara says that they're Torah, that they're thinking about it, that they're not chayiv and kriya shema. But at the end of the day, there was no that you have to do it by the end of the day. So what should they have done? They should have done what any normal person does. They should have been a little bit more careful and make sure that before they sleep with their wife, that they realize that it's her wife. So even though over there he says it's patur, he might say in our case as well, he might agree that it is chayiv over here, even though you tried.
The fact that they're not chayiv for kriya shema means shows that they're mababbled a little bit. I mean, the fact that they're not chayav for kriya shema just shows that they can't concentrate. It doesn't exist anywhere else.
Right. Just means that they can't concentrate, that they're very excited to do it. So I'm saying that's maybe a reason to say that zmano bahul, that like you shouldn't blame them. But it seems to be saying no. They're going to be blamed because if you're going to sleep with a woman and you think you're consummating the marriage, you better make sure that it's the woman first. Okay, listen, it's in the Bible. So v'harei truma de'eno zmano bahul v'kaparta. We have stories like that by Yaakov. Okay. V'harei truma de'en zmano bahul v'kaparta. There's a problem because there's actually a case of Rabbi Yoshua where there is no rush, quote unquote, and he still says you're patur. So too in our case in the Mishnah, if there was no rush, he should say you're patur. What's the case where there was no rush? So Gemara says truma. There's a Mishnah that says haya ochel betruma v'noda shehu ben grusho ben chalutza. If there was a Kohen that was eating truma, and it's interesting, the Gemara is learning what? That truma is a mitzvah to eat. If a Kohen is eating truma and then he finds out in the middle of eating truma that he is a son of a grusha or the son of a chalutza, he's a halal and he's usher to eat truma. Rabbi Eliezer mechayev karen v'chomesh. Yechayev karen v'chomesh. Why? Because ta bidvar mitzvah is still chayev. Yes, you thought you were doing a mitzvah of eating truma, but lemaisa you weren't, because you weren't a Kohen, and therefore you're chayev. Rabbi Yeshua poter. Rabbi Yeshua's poter. Is eating truma a mitzvah that has a set time to it? Is it zmano bahul? No, you don't have to finish it by the end of the day. So therefore, if you see that he's patur, even when you don't have to rush, I could have said, according to our svara, what? He should have been more careful and made sure that he wasn't a ben grusha, made sure that he wasn't a ben chalutza. He's saying no. So Rabbi Yeshua says, no, it doesn't matter. He's still patur because Lamaisa he had good intentions. So I don't understand. So then how can our Mishnah be Rabbi Yeshua? So the Gemara is one step ahead of us, and it says no. Ha'id marala amar Bibi barabaye hacha betruma be'erev pesach askinon dizmana bahol. When Rabbi Yeshua says you're patur, the reason you're patur is because it was a case where you were eating truma on Erev Pesach and you were in a rush to finish the truma before the time of either eating in general or before the time of eating chametz, and therefore you were rushed, and that's why you're patur. But Eina Chanami in our Mishnah, where it's not a case of rushing, and you should just go ahead and make sure you have the right woman before you go ahead and consummate the marriage. Therefore, he would agree that in our case you're chayav for the korban chatos. So again, just to review, our Mishnah at this point is Rabbi Meir, even though as we said it is Rabbi Yossi as well. Our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir according to the Gemara, as we saw in that other case of eating the piece of chaylev, and our Mishnah can also go either according to Rabbi Eliezer or according to Rabbi Yoshua, because even if you say that he's patur when he's tab b'dvar mitzvah lo asa mitzvah, that's only when you were rushing. So we give you a little bit of an out because you were rushing. It's not your fault. But over here he should have checked, and he'll be chayiv even according to Rabbi Yoshua. Okay. Now the Gemara says we're not done. The iba if you want, I could tell you the possibility that the Mishnah is not just Rabbi Meir. I could give you a different possibility of who the Mishnah is. Who's the Mishnah? What I was saying before. The iba we can construct the Mishnah in a totally different case. I would say not as crazy of a case, but as you'll see in a second, it's just as crazy of a case. The iba we're not dealing with an Isser Kolal and an Isser Mosiv. We're just dealing with an Isser Bas Achas, where everything happened at once. Well, it's going to be very interesting to construct a case where everything happened at once. And if it's Isser Bas Achas, who's it according to that you're Chayav? Aliba de Rabbi Shimon, and who else, theoretically? Aliba de Rabbi Yossi, as we said. So there's going to be a case where it's Bas Achas, and it doesn't have to be like Rabbi Meir, who says you're Chayav for Mosif Kolel Bas Achas. It could be even according to Rabbi Shimon, who says you're only Chayav Shtayim for Bas Achas. So what's this case? Well, unfortunately the Gemara doesn't tell us. So what's the case that we have? So let's see. The Gemara says, Bishlama kul b'shkachas u'deshavinu shliach v'shavu inu shaliach u'paga shliach b'shliach. You know how you have a case, how all of these isurim, by the case of the marriage, were chal at one time? You have brothers, right? And the two brothers appointed a shliach to be mekadesh the two girls. Each one wants to be mekadesh. Reuven wants to be mekadesh Rachel with a shliach, and Shimon wants to be mekadesh Leah with a shliach. So what happens? So Reuven and Shimon appoint a shliach and say, go be mekadesh these women, and Rachel and Leah appoint their own shlichim and say, go be accepting the Kiddushin for us. So what happens? Where do the Shlichim meet? They meet in the middle. So when the Shlichim meet, what happens? All of the Yisurim are chal together. Because now they're both, right? Because the whole reason we had to construct the case differently over there was because we didn't think it was possible for them to get married at the same exact time. Even if you go under the same chuppah, one of them is going to be married first. No. Since they both had shlichim sending to be mekadesh the woman, and the woman had shlichim sending to accept the kiddushin, so they were chal at the same time. The isser of eshes ish, the isser of eshes ach, and the isser of achos isha. What's the problem? There's a fourth component to the Mishnah. What was that? Nida. That she was a nida. So you're going to say that both women became nida. Now it wouldn't be so crazy. We would say, okay, the Gemara sometimes would say that. The Gemara, even the Gemara is not going to say that. The Gemara is not going to suggest that both women happen to have begun menstruating at exactly the same time that the two shlichim met. So how do you figure out how the case, the other three, I understand and makes sense, how you could have a case where they came exactly together. But where are you going to be able to put into this case, because again, the Mishnah talks about a nida, how are you going to be able to put into this case that the nidus was chal at exactly the same time as the kedushin was chal? So you're not going to be able to guess. So we're going to keep going. Ela nidus heichi mishkachas la. How do you fit in the nidas here? Amar Rav bishofos mitoch yud gimel la'achar shlosha asar lechiu ve'inu mitoch shnei masar la'achar shnei masar lechiu ve'inu. So it's always so interesting when we say they're never going to make it that they became nidas at exactly the same time that the shlichim met. That's too extreme of a case. Well, you think that's an extreme case? Listen to the case that they just came up with. You know what case they came up with? They came up with a case where they were born. They have the same birthday, all four of them. They're twins and they're twins, and they have the same birthday, except they weren't born the same year. They were born 1 year apart. The boys were born January 1st, 2000, and the girls were born January 1st, 2001. So what's going to happen on January 1st, 2013? The girls are going to become bat mitzvah, and the boys are going to become bar mitzvah. Okay. What happens in this case? So I'll tell you what happens. The Gemara says the woman, both of the girls, started menstruating on December 31st, 2012. So what happens? So they're not nidas yet because they're not bar mitzvah yet. Both of them sent. Well, it's interesting because according to this, you don't even have to have the case of shlichim. But let's just say the way that we're learning. Both of them sent shlichim, but they sent shlichim with a tanai. I want you to be mekadesh this woman, but I only want it to become effective on the common birthday on January 1st. So now they all made a tanai that the kiddushin is. The men made a tanai that the kiddushin is going to be chal on January 1st. What happens when January 1st comes? Well, when January 1st comes, the Keddushins are chal, because that was the Tanai. And what happened else? What else happened when January 1st was chal? The nida that started on December 31st, I'm using, obviously you could say shkia, but the nida that started on December 31st, when January 1st comes, it's shkia, so what happens? All of a sudden that kicks in as well. So as soon as shkia on December 31st comes, everything kicks in. The Kiddushin kicks in, because its Tanai was that it's going to be chal on January 1st, i.e. shkia of December 31st. And by definition, since they were both menstruating when December 31st started and now going into January 1st, as soon as that came, so everything was chal. Now my point, which the Gemara doesn't say, I wanted to suggest, and the Rishonim suggests this, that once you have this idea of the nida happening like this, you don't have to. You could throw out the fact that there were any shlichim involved, because once it was all done al tanai, so it could have just been that the husbands themselves gave the kiddushin to the woman al tanai. You don't need the shlichim to be involved. The shlichim were involved in order to make it a bas achas case. But once you're making the whole case as being al tanai, that it's on condition, then they could have given it to them on July 31st and said, here's the kiddushin al tanai, that it only becomes effective on December 31st at shkia. So that's basically, you could throw out the shlichim. But at this basically, at this point, we were trying to establish that our case in the Mishnah was a case where everything happened together. How did everything happen together? When the boys, Reuven and Shimon, made the Kedushin tonight, they made it a tonight that it's conditional, it's only going to be Chal on January 1st, 2013, which happens to be the same time that we become Bar Mitzvah and you become Bat Mitzvah, and therefore the Rochal, again, Kedushin can happen before the Bar Mitzvah and the Bat Mitzvah, but the Nida can't happen, the Isser Nida, and therefore as soon as January 1st comes, as soon as Shkia comes on December 31st, the Kedushin is Chal, happens to be that they become Nidas at that same exact time, and all four happen at once. Therefore the case in the Mishnah is a case of Bas Achas. We see that you're Chayav by Bas Achas. Who is that like? That's like Rabbi Shimon, and also like Rabbi Yossi.
Not a problem with two simchas at the same time?
What?
Not a problem with two simchas at the same time?
Ein Marvin Simcha B'Simcha? I think we have other problems here.
Why do
a lot more problems to worry about.
Why do you have to say the boys are bar mitzvah that time? Wasn't it good enough just the girls became bas mitzvah that time because they weren't needed till their bas mitzvah? Once they become bas mitzvah on that day, then they all...
Right, so he's making a good point too. It didn't have to be, according to this, it didn't have to be that the boys became bar mitzvah at the same time. Because if the whole problem is the nida, no, because we also want to be chal on these boys.
Yeah, but this only comes also to the
nida of this girl, right?
Until they're bas mitzvah, they're not bas mitzvah till that day.
Okay, interesting. Okay. So are we done with the hard part? I think so. I think we could say we're done with the hard part. Okay, it's not easy, but we're done with the hard part for now. I can't tell you, Baruch Hashem, I'm not doing DAF Yomi, so you guys have to keep going, and I get to keep to relax a little bit. Mafrishino son. So now we're saying again the way that we said that it was an accident, right? Once it was an accident, it was an accidental swap. This is very interesting now. This whole thing is interesting. This is extremely interesting. So, accidental swap. So now we said we do have that they're allowed to go back to their husbands, but they got to wait 3 months. They have to wait 3 months because maybe they're pregnant. The question, the Gemara says, what are you worried about? Send them back right away. This was the first bia. A woman cannot become pregnant on the first bia.
It's not that way.
So we'll see in a second where Zmanazeh comes from. We'll see in the Gemara in a second. But a woman, according to the Gemara, naturally a woman cannot become pregnant on the first bia. Amar Rabbi Nachman. So Rabbi Nachman says, so then why do we have to be mafresh? It's a kasha. Amar Rabbi Nachman, Amar Rabbi Baravua, no. Sheba'alu v'shanu, no. Who said that they found out the first time? The Mishnah doesn't say that they found out the first time. They had numerous bias with this woman before they found out that this was the wrong woman. Okay, they didn't see her before, and now all of a sudden they're walking in the street and say, "How's everything going? How's your marriage? Wonderful. Me and Leah are really hitting it off." Leah, you're supposed to be married to Rachel. What's going on over here? Okay, shebalu v'shanu. So therefore, why do they have to separate? You're right, because if they only had Bia once, she couldn't have been pregnant, and then they could go back to their husbands. It was a mistake. But if they had Bia more than once, then the second time that they had Bia, she could have become pregnant. So now, assuming that they had Bia more than once, now they have to separate 3 times. The Gemara has a kasha. What do you think the kasha is? Come on, if you can get this without looking inside, what's the kasha? If they had Bia more than one time, then what's the problem? What did Rabbi Chia say? Rabbi Chia said you only have to have 16. Rabbi Chia said our Mishnah you have 16 chatos. If you're setting up the case in our Mishnah as being that they had bia more than once, then Rabbi Chia should have said you have 32 chatos, or you have 64 chatos, 128 chatos. Maybe they were together for a year before they realized that they were with the wrong woman. So if he said that they were together twice, then they might say they should be chayiv 32 chatos. So they answer back for a second. Again, you set up over here the case aliba de Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is even stricter. He says the mechayiv kol koach v'koach tu v'havyan. Rabbi Eliezer in general is very strict. He says even when you have one act of bia, every time you go in and out, you're chayiv for another chatas. So Rabbi Eliezer already, even if it was a case of one bia, he would have held that you're chayiv much more than 16. If you went in and out 5 times, and you're chayiv 5 times 16, 80. So it's not going to work according to you either. So Ela de bekoach rishon kachash v'chanami de bia rishon kachash. If you're right, Rabbi Chia, when he says 16, you're right. If they have bia twice, then he's going to be chayiv 32. Rabbi Chia was only counting the first time that they had bia. But Einachanami, the way you're setting up the Mishnah, that they had bia once and then they had bia again, Einachanami, according to Rabbi Chia, you're going to be chayiv 32. And according to Rabbi Eliezer, I don't even want to know how many you're going to be mechayiv, because again, each act of bia, every time you go in and out, you're chayiv chatos. So you could be chayiv 128 for the first one, and 128, let's just say there's a lot of chatos going on. Fine. But either way, we see what? We see that they had bia more than once, but we see here that the Gemara clearly says that a woman cannot become pregnant from the first bia. Okay. Amalei Rava Rav Nachman. Rava says to Rav Nachman, well, what does that mean? V'hatamar b'bia rishona iabra. Tamar became pregnant from the first bia with who? With who? With Yehuda. She became pregnant. She never became pregnant from Erva Onan. She became pregnant. What?
How do they know if it was the first bit?
So they know. The Gemara knows.
But she had relations. She wasn't a Psula.
So we're going to see. So 1 second. So the Gemara is answering, how is it possible that you're telling me that you don't get pregnant from the first Bia? Lamaisa, Tamar got pregnant from the first Bia. So the Gemara is going to say, well, first of all, the Gemara, she was married already, but the Gemara is not even going to get there. The Gemara is going to say, no, Amar le Tamar be'etzba maka. Forget about the fact that she was married already. The fact that it was her first bia wasn't her first bia. Tamar actually went ahead and broke her hymen. And this is where you said Lamaisa. It's not so much Lamaisa today, because it's very common today for the girl to break her hymen before, not on purpose necessarily, but with tampons and with horseback riding and all the other things that we do. It used to be, right, the whole Gemara in Kedushin is based on the fact that what? You come and you say, my wife didn't bleed. She didn't break her hymen. She must have been Mizana. No, nowadays we don't say that. If somebody comes to a rabbi and says, my wife didn't bleed the first time, so you have to be poresh, you still have to separate. But Lamaisa, at the end of the day, we're not going to assume that she was Mizana. We're going to assume that she broke her hymen somehow. It's common to break your hymen nowadays. So Tamar be'etzba maka. So you're wrong. No. Tamar was bebia rishona. How did she become pregnant? Because she had broken her hymen beforehand. The Amar Rav Yitzchak, kol moachol shabes Rebbe, any girl in the house of Rebbe who breaks her hymen, Tamar shman. So you don't want to be called Tamar in the house of Rebbe, because if your name's Tamar, then we know that you broke your hymen. Vilama nikra shman Tamar. Why do they call them Tamar? Al Shem Tamar Shemaka be'etzba. Fine. So again, we haven't disproved the Mishnah. We haven't disproved what we said. We said a woman cannot become pregnant on the first bia. You're right. How did Tamar become pregnant on the first bia? It wasn't that because it was her first bia, but it wasn't really her first bia, because Lamai says she had broken her hymen before, and it means you can't become pregnant the first time you have bia if your hymen is still intact. But now we have a problem. V'hahavu erva onan. Forget about the fact that she broke her hymen. Lamai says she had 2 husbands before this. So Gemara says, no, Erva Onan Shimshu Shalo Kedarkan. She never had regular bia with Erva Onan. Erva Onan were only Mishamesh her from the back, not from the front, not a regular bia. And therefore, this was the bia rishona for her. Meisvei, we have a brisa that seems to clearly say that Erva Onan were mishamesh with Tamar the regular way. Why? Kolas and varba chodesh dash mibiftim mizor mibachutz. The Rabbi Eliezer holds something very interesting. He says that when your wife is nursing, right, a wife usually nurses for 24 months. Again, nowadays it's not so common, but it used to be a wife would nurse for 24 months. So he says that for 24 months, it's not healthy for her to become pregnant again. It happens to be that nowadays people claim that while a wife is nursing, she's not going to become pregnant. It's not foolproof. You shouldn't. The doctors always say don't rely on that. It's common that a woman doesn't become pregnant if she's not menstruating, if she's nursing. But it does happen once in a blue moon. It can happen that
it happens more often than that. Because people have babies every year. How do they do that?
They're not necessarily nursing. They're not necessarily nursing. Once you stop nursing, right? There's a discussion in the Gemara Nida that there's a connection between the blood and the milk, and the blood turns into milk. But Lamaisa, according to the Gemara, we see clearly here that it's not foolproof. That even those who claim, right? I don't know if anybody's ever heard this before, but it's common that people say, oh, when you're nursing, don't worry, you don't have to do birth control, you don't have to do anything, whatever, because Lamaisa, you can't become common.
The thing with nursing also is that it has to be constant.
It has to be constant, right? It can't be on and off, right? It has to be all the time. It can't be a bottle here and nursing once a day or 3. It has to be every time she eats, right? But Lamaisa, what do we see here? So he holds that it's dangerous to become pregnant while she's nursing, because if you become pregnant, it ruins the milk. So what are you supposed to do if you're having relations? You're not going to not have relations with your wife for 2 years after she has a baby. So what do you do? So Rabbi Eliezer holds you can have regular relations, but when you ejaculate, it needs to be outside of her, just to make sure that she doesn't become pregnant. They throw up their hands. Amar lei, halalu einu ela kamase erva onan. That's not mutter. That's usher. Have bitachon in Hashem. Have regular bia. And go ahead, and you don't have to worry about the baby getting hurt. But Lamaisa, what do we see in this brisa? That's what Erva Onan did. What did Erva Onan do according to this? They ejaculated outside, but what does that mean? They had regular bia. They just didn't ejaculate inside of her. Okay. Kimaisa Erva Onan. No, so the Gemara answer is no. Kimaisa Erva Onan, velo Kimaisa Erva Onan. The Gemara rejects that suggestion and says no. In some ways, if you do this, if you have bia with your wife during the 24 months and then ejaculate outside of her, in some ways you're doing like Erva Onan, and in some ways you're not doing like Erva Onan. In some ways you're doing like Erva Onan, that you're wasting the seed. But in some ways you're not doing like Erva Onan. Why? Because they did it shelo kedarka, and over here, this case is talking about when you're doing it kedarka. So again, we see over here that Erva Onan only had shimush, they only had relations with Tamar shelo kedarkan, and therefore when Tamar was with Yehuda, it was her first time. You can't get pregnant your first time? Yeah, you can get pregnant your first time if your hymen is already broken. Now the Gemara is going to say Bishlama Onan. So now we're saying, well, 1 second, before you accuse Erva Onan of wasting seed in general, Okay, so you have to bring me proof. So Bishlama Onan, we just have the pasuk. Dichsiv beva shichet arza. It says clearly in the pasuk that he was shichet arza, that he wasted seed. Ela er minalan. How do we know that er wasted seed? Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak dichsiv Yevamos gam oso, because he died. Afhu beoso misa meis gam oso. He died the same way that er died. He died the same way that Onan died, and therefore we see that er and Onan both wasted seed. But now the question is, why did they have bia with Tamar only shelo kedarka, and why didn't they have regular bia with her? Even if they wasted the seed, why didn't they have regular bia? It's much more enjoyable to have regular bia and then waste the seed if you want to waste the seed. But why didn't they have regular bia with her? So Bishlama Onan, why did he act this way? Mishum lo yazar. I'm sorry. The Gemara is not assuming that they should have wasted the seed. The Gemara is saying, why didn't they just have regular bia with her? Like, what was the big deal? Why do you have to waste the seed? Why do you have to do it shelo kedarka? Just have regular bia with her. Onan makes sense. Mishum lo yazara. He didn't want to do it because if the kid would have been born after his brother Er died and he was doing Yibum basically, so if the kid would have been born, everybody said, oh, it's so nice. This is your kid from Onan. Well, really, it's Er's kid, because we consider the kid from the Yibum to be the name of Er who passed away. So he didn't want to have to walk around his whole life having a kid where it wasn't really his kid, quote unquote, that it was his brother's kid who had died. Ella Er, my time of it. Why did Er do such a thing? Er was the first one married to her. Why didn't he have regular bia with her? Because she was beautiful, and he was afraid that if she became pregnant, then it would ruin, and she wouldn't be so beautiful. So he only had bia with her shelo kedarka. So it comes out again that Er ve'onan had bia with Tamar shelo kedarka. Tamar's first time that she had a regular bia was with Yehuda. You told me, and it implies from our Mishnah that when you have bia, you can't become pregnant the first time. She was able to become pregnant the first time because she had her hymen broken beforehand. She broke her hymen, it sounds like, beforehand to make sure, Dafka, that she would, because again, we don't know how many times she was going to be with Yehuda. She was doing it l'shem shamayim. She only had one chance. Right. So she wanted to make sure that she would become pregnant. So she broke her hymen, and therefore she was able to become pregnant even the first time. Okay. Tana Rabbanan. Just a few more minutes.
Why does the Gemara even suggest that you could finish outside when you're nursing if this is the very reason that Aaron Onan were killed?
Right. So you're asking what's the havamina of Rabbi Eliezer for all intents and purposes. Amar Le, when they answered Rabbi Eliezer, halalu einu ela kamasa Aaron Onan. They're saying that's ridiculous. This is so you're asking according to Rabbi Eliezer. So what I would suggest is maybe Rabbi Eliezer will tell you that lamaisa this is a case of pikuach nefesh.
Right.
Maybe he'll tell you that. Oh, is that what they say? Okay, Baruch Shekivanti L'Art School. Okay, this is my day. I'm going to go buy a lottery ticket after this year. Okay.
So the baby who was nursing wouldn't have proper milk. The baby who's
nursing, if the baby's nursing is not going to have proper milk, so then you're going to say that it's pikuach nefesh. You're not going to. You can't.
Pikuach nefesh for the husband.
Well, you're saying it's something that you can't make a gzera that the people can't hold by. You can't tell him that he can't have relations for 2 years. So once you can't have relations for 2 years, so now it's pikuach nefesh for him not to do this because if she becomes pregnant, then it's pikuach nefesh for the baby. That's what I would suggest.
Source of food for
right. That's what especially if there's no formula. Right. So now we have a separate pasuk. The pasuk says, "Ve'isha asher yishkav isha osa shechva zera v'rachatzu b'mayim." That after a bia, any bia, a man and a woman need to go to the mikvah and tovel. So what does the Gemara here say? Osa, the word osa in that pasuk is prat lakala. A kala, the first time she has bia, does not have to go to the mikvah. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. V'chachamim omrim, and seemingly the husband wouldn't have to go either. Chamim prat l'shelo kedarka. If you have bia shelo kedarka, which is not necessarily a good thing, but if you have bia shelo kedarka, so you don't have to go to the mikvah either. Amalei hon berei de Rav Nachman l'Rav Nachman leima kasav Rabbi Yehuda haTorah chasat shite kala. So the Gemara is going to give two reasons why we would suggest that a kala after the first time doesn't have to go to the mikvah. One reason is because we don't want her to ruin her makeup. She needs to be beautiful for her husband. Amar le lefisha ein isha misaberes mebia rishona. And the second reason seemingly is because she can't become pregnant. You only have to go, again, as we said, you can't become pregnant unless you broke your hymen before. You can't become pregnant from the first bia. So since she couldn't become pregnant seemingly from the first bia, you only have to go to the mikvah after you have bia which had the potential to become pregnant. And therefore a kala for these two reasons, not to ruin her makeup, and because she couldn't become pregnant when she had the bia, she does not have to go to the mikvah. B'maika mifligi, what are they arguing about? That it's excluding a kala versus excluding shelo kedarka. They're arguing about how to interpret the words. Rabbanan savri, again, the pasuk says v'isha asher yishkav osa shechva zera v'rachatzu b'mayim. They have to go to the mikvah. So Rabbanan savri shechva zera from the word shechva zera prasla ha'ara. This is a third case, that if you have bia but you don't actually have bia, as Rashi explains, you either don't shelo hizriya, you didn't ejaculate at all. Either you just touched a little bit or the atara went in a little bit, but either way, if you have that type of bia without ejaculation, so then you do not have to go to the mikveh, either one afterwards. That's from shechva zera, because zera. Osa, her is prat shelo kedarka. So Rabbanan say that a kala would have to go to the mikvah, that they'd have to go to the mikvah after the first time. But hara, if you only have a little bit of a bia without ejaculation, or shalo kedarka, then you don't have to go to the mikvah. For Rabbi Yehuda Savar, no. Shalo kedarka v'hara mishich vazera. We can learn those two from the word shich vazera. So now we're left with the word osa. Nafka osa prat lekala. So it just comes out that they're basically arguing in the case of a kala. Everybody agrees that when it's shalo kedarka, when it's not done the regular way, or it's only done a little bit without any ejaculation, everybody agrees that the man and woman don't have to go to the mikveh the next day. But Rabbi Yehuda adds from the word osa that the first time that when a kala has bia for the first time with her husband, so since she cannot become pregnant in a natural way the first time unless a hymen was broken beforehand, so since she cannot become pregnant, so she would not have to go to the mikveh. It seems to me that the Gemara would say that if her hymen was broken and she was able to become pregnant the first time, so then in a chanami they would have to go to the mikveh after this. Obviously we don't do this halacha l'maisa. That's what the pasuk says. Both of them have to go to the mikveh. It's the drasha in the pasuk. Ki asa Ravin, we're almost done. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So now we have a separate discussion. Kol sheshasa achar bala eser shanim v'nisei shuv ena yoledes. That a woman who is no longer married to her husband, if 10 years pass before she goes ahead and gets remarried, she can no longer have children. Very interesting. It's like the natural way of the body, that if she waits 10 years before remarrying, the Gemara is telling you she'll never have babies. Amar of Nachman, lo shana ela she'ein daita linaseh. No. That's only if she never had intention to remarry. But if she had intention to remarry, I don't know if it means throughout the entire 10 years or once within the 10 years she has intention to remarry, it sort of like keeps her body in the shape to be able to have children, and therefore even if she gets married after 10 years, she will be able to have children. Aval daita linaseh mitaberet. Amalei Rava lebas Rav Chisda. So Rava said to Bas Rav Chisda. Bas Rav Chisda was actually Rava's wife, and Rava married Bas Rav Chisda after her husband had passed away, Rami Bar Chama, and she married him more than 10 years after Rami Bar Chama passed away. So what should it have been? Should have been that Rav Chisda's daughter, Bas Rav Chisda, could not have children. So he says to her, you had a baby. You married me only 10 years. You married me more than 10 years after your husband passed away. Everybody's talking about you because you sort of like broke the laws of nature. Because everybody held that if you get married more than 10 years after your husband is gone, or that you're no longer married to him, you're not going to be able to have kids. So she said, no, I'm exactly what it was. Ana daiti alecha havya. I had intention the entire time to get remarried. And she says, interestingly, you'll notice, I didn't just have intention to get remarried the entire time, I actually had intention to get remarried to you. And the Rishonim point out that there's actually, if you remember, there's a Gemara which says that when she was young, they asked her who she wants to marry. Does she want to marry Rava, or does she want to marry Rami Bar Chama? And the little child, she said both. And therefore she actually had a nevuah, and she ended up marrying both of them. So again, because the rabbi thought that she was crazy after her husband passed away, right? She must have had a long line of shidduchim, right? So they thought, of course, you got to give him. No, I'm waiting. I guess she waited until Rava's wife passed away, until Rava became available. But either way, you see over here that as long as she had intention, it's interesting. It's like a natural thing in the body. As long as she had intention to get remarried within the 10 years, so then even if she gets remarried after 10 years, she can go ahead and she will be able to naturally have children. Let's just finish over here. Hahida asila kameid Rav Yosef. Somebody came before Rav Yosef. Amrlo, Rabbi, I want to show you the rabbis are wrong. Ana shahisi achar bali eser shani veladati. I waited 10 years after my husband passed away. I got remarried only after 10 years. I never had intention to get remarried, and look, I had a baby anyway. Rabbis are wrong. Amar le biti al totzi lazal divrei chamim. Whoa, woman, don't start talking about the chamim. Then she said, Amar le, I admit, you're right. L'nachri nivalti. You're right, I didn't necessarily have the intention, but I had bia with the nachri during those 10 years. Again, we're not going to get into discussion why exactly it had to be a nachri, why couldn't it be any, but okay. The nachri nivalti, I had relations with the nachri, so it breaks the rule of the Mishnah, it breaks the rule that we said. We said that the rule is that if a woman never had intent to get remarried during those 10 years, then naturally she will not be able to have kids after those 10 years. But again, if she had in mind to get remarried, maybe once, maybe throughout the 10 years, then even after 10 years pass, she can now naturally be able to have kids. And if she has bia in the middle, so then we see from this story that if she happened to have a bia in the middle, it sounds like it keeps her system. She didn't do the right thing, don't get me wrong, by being nivalti to a nachri, but it sounds like
she didn't have her 10 years.
She didn't have her 10 years, it sounds like, without having bia, and therefore naturally the body will be able to then have children again. Shkoyach, everyone.